Actually on the rise. I promise you will be surprised. We've also got a smart sunshine stock, healthy living with Herb, and we're doing the electric slide with Phil LeBeau. We're talking about General Motors and its Volt. All right, Mandy's off today, folks. She'll be back tomorrow, and we're going to have much more on the day's moves ahead. But right now, to a man who says, do not look for double-digit returns in any financial asset class for the next few years. PIMCO's Bill Gross joining us now. And Bill, in your most recent market commentary, which, by the way, Herb Greenberg and I think was one of the best yet, you give what you call three structural hurricanes impacting the world right now. I'm going to run our viewers quickly through them, and I'll let you comment, okay? Number one, globalization has hollowed out the labor market. Number two, technology has essentially outdated entire industries. And three, an aging demographic favors saving over spending. In your mind, is the first the biggest problem? Because you warn about how labor is not participating in wealth creation, and that is a macro global threat.
Yeah, I think so. That's certainly the most immediate problem, globalization. Policymakers may be killing their golden goose, in this case the American worker, whose household income at $49,000, Brian, is the lowest in more than a decade. And to the extent that jobs go to China and overseas as opposed to stay in the United States, then that affects, obviously, employment, it affects levels for unemployment, and it affects economic growth going forward. Without the consumer, without the wage earner, you have very little in terms of the potential for consumer growth and for economic growth going forward.
You know, and as Carmen Reinhart and Ken Rogoff pointed out in their book, This Time is Different, they note how that over history, financial crises become banking crises, become political crises. We're seeing the riots of the protests in Greece. We're seeing Occupy Wall Street here. Is this going to turn into more of a political crises whereby the people sort of march up, rise up, if you will, and these austerity programs are forced to go on the back burner, thus disenabling a country like Greece to pay its bills?
I don't think we're going that far in the United States. To some extent, the movement, so to speak, that we see in Greece in terms of the strikes and the protests, simply haven't gravitated over here, and I don't suspect they will. We're always fascinated by the debates and by the policy differences, so to speak, but to a considerable extent, the policies are much the same in terms of favoring capital as opposed to labor. And until we begin to have that sense in terms of the Main Street public that it's labor that needs to be favored in terms of policies, then I don't think we're going to see much of a protest per se.
Hey, Bill, this is Herb. You know, in the report, you pulled no punches, and you said, there are no double-digit investment returns anywhere in sight for owners of financial assets, bonds, stocks, real estate, the whole schlemiel. And the question I have for you is this. What is the disconnect you see between, we hear Warren Buffett talking about his businesses, they're doing well. We hear all these people, all the business councils, business is doing fine, don't worry. And, meanwhile, you're saying, those stocks aren't going to give you double-digit returns. What's the disconnect here?
Well, there's several things to consider, Herb. One, the fact that interest rates are so low that the discounting mechanism for stocks, that is the bringing forward of earnings growth, whatever it is, at a discount rate that's appropriate, it has already taken place. In other words, the interest rate effect is gone. Secondly, that therefore means that we depend upon real growth going forward, and corporate profits might be doing well with Buffett companies and might be doing well in terms of certain segments, but if you can only grow an economy by 0 to 1 to 2%, basically corporate profits freeze, and in many cases they go down. It's what we call the stall effect, to the extent that you can't grow any faster than 1 or 2%, which is what we call the new normal, then corporate profits are really threatened going forward.
So then it sounds like you're saying, Bill, and I garnered this a bit from reading your commentary, which is that corporate profits, yes, while sort of nominally are at record highs, are being artificially skewed that way by low rates, and thus stocks are overvalued right now?
Well, they have that potential. You know, if corporate profits can't keep on increasing, and up until this point, up until 4 to 6 weeks ago, the market expected profits to move up by 10 to 15% almost annually. If they can't do that, then yes, the mechanism that is fundamentally part of the valuation process, the interest rate itself, you know, basically is floored in terms of 2 years, in terms of 5 years, and as we're beginning to see in terms of 30-year bonds as well.
But interest rates are what they are. So do I care if borrowing costs are 2%, 3%, 4% for corporate America? Because being where they are, and it doesn't look like they're moving anytime soon, according to the Fed with its sort of rate strategy to the middle of 2013, shouldn't we then have this artificial skewing to the benefit of the stock market for the next year and a half plus?
Well, it should be supportive. I mean, that's what Ben Bernanke has done with QE1, QE2, and now the twist. To the extent that he's brought interest rates down, it's been supportive for stock prices. Just look at an electric utility, for instance, you know, something with relatively measured and consistent, you know, dividend growth going forward. To the extent that it yields 4 to 4.5%, that's a much better deal than 2.5% in terms of the long bond. The problem is it consistent? You know, can you count on it? And so, you know, up until this point, lower interest rates have certainly been beneficial. From this point forward, you need real growth going forward in order to continue the trend.
So all the kings, I like to call it all the king's horses and all the king's men, that being the low interest rates, isn't really going to make a difference here. And we're not seeing it make a big difference, and it's not a consistent difference. I mean, that's what you're really saying. You know, you started this report. It was a wonderful report. You talked about the flab around your midsection.
You talked about the muffin top, which is